Welcome to Incentives Matter, your guide to what's new in behavioral science and behavioral economics. Let's see what's really driving decisions. Okay, so imagine you're a manager and you've got a remote team. You're thinking, how do I make sure everyone's pulling their weight? I'll use a dashboard. Real-time tracking of everyone's effort, transparent for all to see. That'll motivate the slackers, right?
Sounds logical, doesn't it? Standard Silicon Valley wisdom. More data, more transparency, more productivity. Except a brand new study just dropped, and it found that this exact intervention didn't just fail to motivate people, it actually tanked team effort. Like spectacularly blew up in their faces, reducing overall output and sometimes causing teams to completely unravel. Wait, really? So the thing that sounds like it should work, the digital nudge to make people more accountable, actually made them less productive? That's wild. Wild and highly counterintuitive. It's a perfect example of how what works for an individual can completely backfire when you apply it to a complex team. That's fascinating, because the past few years have seen this massive explosion of remote work, right? And with it, this whole industry of digital nudges and bossware has just taken off. Companies are scrambling to figure out how to manage productivity when they can't see their employees physically in an office. They're investing in all these tools, gamified dashboards, Slackbot reminders, keystroke trackers, all designed to supposedly make us more efficient. Absolutely. I mean, surveys from late 2022 showed that 60% of companies with remote workers were already using some form of employee monitoring software. Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella even coined the term productivity paranoia to describe this whole trend. It's this deep-seated fear that if you can't physically see people, they must be slacking off. But the fundamental question has always been, do these digital nudges actually improve teamwork, or are we just throwing individual productivity hacks at group dynamics and hoping they stick?
And that's exactly what this new research, led by Pranav Gupta from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign and Anita Williams-Woolley from Carnegie Mellon, set out to answer. They specifically looked at how algorithmic, bot-driven nudges impacted collective intelligence in temporary remote teams.
And it's crucial to flag Anita Woolley's involvement here. She's really a pioneer in the field of collective intelligence. Back in 2010, she co-authored a foundational paper in Science that basically proved that a group's ability to solve problems, its collective intelligence, isn't just the sum of individual IQs. It's driven by collaboration processes, social perceptiveness, and diversity within the group. So this isn't just some casual observation. This is rigorous research building on a solid theoretical foundation.
Right. So the researchers designed this really elegant large-scale experiment. They recruited over 500 workers from Amazon Mechanical Turk, a great proxy for temporary gig economy-style teams or cross-functional groups that are constantly forming and disbanding in modern corporations. They assigned them to 168 online groups, each with 3 or 4 members. And they gave these groups a robust task, the Test of Collective Intelligence, or TCI. This isn't just a simple single puzzle. It's a battery of exercises designed to really capture a group's ability to collaborate dynamically across various problem-solving scenarios. So you're measuring genuine group intelligence, not just performance on one narrow task. Exactly. And the cool part is how they tested the nudges. They took these groups and randomly assigned them to one of 4 experimental nudge conditions, all delivered by algorithmic bots integrated into their digital interface, or a 5th control group with no nudges. The researchers actually hypothesized that nudging collaborative processes would improve collective intelligence. What they found, though, was a chaotic mix of success, total failure, and spectacular backfires, as the paper puts it.
It's a goldmine for understanding the nuances of behavioral interventions. You've got this great sample size, a robust measure of generalized group intelligence, and then you see how these carefully designed digital interventions play out in the messy reality of human interaction.
It also makes you think about how many companies are just blindly implementing these tools without this level of scientific rigor. I mean, they're basically running their own uncontrolled experiments on their employees.
Exactly, and that's why this paper is so important. It gives us a map of what's happening.
So, before we dive into the spectacular backfires, and trust me, there are some good ones, let's talk about what actually did work and what just fell flat. Was there anything that reliably enhanced collective intelligence?
There was one clear winner, the Skill Facilitator bot. This nudge was designed to prompt group members to discuss their specific skills and how those skills could be applied to the task at hand. It operated as a chat-based facilitator, basically asking the team to map out their expertise before they even dove into the work.
So instead of just saying, hey team, work together, it was more like, what are you good at? What's your superpower?
Precisely. And it worked. It was the only intervention that reliably enhanced collective intelligence. From a behavioral science perspective, this makes perfect sense. It taps into the development of what we call a transactive memory system, or TMS. Think of it like a shared mental database for the team. When members explicitly state their strengths, the team doesn't waste cognitive load trying to figure out who knows what or who should do which part. They create this robust collective memory that they can draw from, making their collaboration much more efficient.
That makes total sense. If I know you're great at data analysis and I'm better at communication, we naturally fall into those roles without a lot of friction. But if we don't know each other's skills, we might both try to do everything, or worse, duplicate effort.
Exactly. It streamlines the entire process. Now, let's compare that to one of the nudges that did absolutely nothing.
Oh, the dud.
The dud was a nudge that simply prompted collaborators to discuss if or how to divide the work and to agree on what each contributor would do at the start of new tasks. Essentially, it just told them, hey, divide up the work.
So let's figure out who is doing what, which is something you hear in almost every kickoff meeting in the corporate world.
Exactly. And the result? Absolutely zero effect on collaboration or collective intelligence. It didn't move the needle at all.
That's a classic example of nudge washing, isn't it? Managers love to start meetings with that kind of directive, assuming it drives efficiency. But what this data shows is that it's a wasted effort unless it's strictly tied to a psychological mapping of skills and expertise. Simply telling people to divide the work is an empty directive.
Precisely. It highlights that nudges require precise behavioral targeting. A vague structural prompt just doesn't change behavior. It's like telling a soccer team to play better versus telling the striker to pass to the left wing when you're double-teamed. One is actionable, the other is just noise.
Okay, so we know what worked and what was a total dud. Now let's get to the juicy part, the backfires. You mentioned that real-time effort tracking caused teams to implode. Tell me more about this intervention.
This is the centerpiece, really. The researchers introduced a nudge that provided real-time feedback on each collaborator's relative contribution of effort. Imagine a dashboard or a Slack integration that shows you exactly how much you're typing, clicking, contributing compared to the other 3 people in your group.
So a digital scoreboard of who's working hardest. The intention, I assume, was classic behavioral economics. Use transparency and peer pressure to motivate the freeloaders to step up.
That was absolutely the intention. But the results were, as you said, disastrous. This real-time relative effort tracking backfired massively. It resulted in a significant negative effect on the total level of team effort, which in turn indirectly tanked the group's collective intelligence. In some cases, the frustration was so intense, the teams completely imploded.
That's astounding. Why? Why would showing people who's doing more work make everyone do less work?
This is where we need to introduce a key psychological mechanism, the sucker effect. It's a sub-phenomenon of social loafing.
Social loafing. That's the tendency for individuals to exert less effort in a group than when working alone, right? The classic Ringelmann effect from the early 1900s, where people pull less on a rope in a group.
Exactly. But in 1983, a researcher named Norbert Kerr identified something more nuanced. He found that social loafing isn't just about lazy people hiding in a crowd. A significant driver is actually high performers realizing they are carrying the team. Because people have a deep psychological aversion to being taken advantage of, to being played for a sucker, they will purposefully reduce their own effort to match the lowest common denominator. Kerr even found that in severe cases, partners would rather fail at a task entirely than feel like they were being exploited.
Oh, wow. So when that effort dashboard came up, it didn't shame the slackers into working harder. It broadcasted the inequity to the high performers. And they thought, forget this, I'm not going to be a sucker.
Precisely. The participants who were carrying the load saw the data, got frustrated, and quit trying as hard. They pulled back their effort. And simultaneously, the participants who were called out for low effort tended to withdraw even further, either out of embarrassment or disengagement. So instead of a race to the top, it triggered a race to the bottom. Everyone ended up doing less.
That completely destroys the Silicon Valley myth that radical transparency is always a virtue. I mean, it sounds good on paper, but when you make effort relative and transparent in this way, you don't trigger healthy competition, you trigger this incredibly destructive sucker effect.
As lead author Pranav Gupta warns, and I quote, "Our findings also serve as a cautionary tale. Even simple and well-intentioned digital tools can have unintended psychological effects and may cause more harm than benefit to collaboration." It's a powerful statement that directly contradicts a lot of current tech trends.
Okay, so the effort tracking dashboard was a disaster, but that wasn't the only intervention that blew up in the researchers' faces, was it? There was another classic productivity hack that also caused unintended harm.
That's right. The researchers also tested a nudge that primed workers to think about and discuss task assignments, identify gaps, resolve conflicts, and then check off completed work to update progress.
So basically a digital equivalent of Jira, Asana, or a rigid Trello board. Like, here's your to-do list, check it off, update your status.
Exactly that. On paper, it sounds like the epitome of structured productivity, but surprisingly, this nudge resulted in a weaker task strategy and had an indirect negative effect on collective intelligence.
Wait, a to-do list made them less effective? I use to-do lists all the time.
And for an individual, a rigid checklist is fantastic. It clears cognitive clutter, gives you a clear path, and provides a nice dopamine hit when you check something off. But the paper's authors engage in what they call structured speculation to explain why this failed for teams. The core issue lies in the difference between nudging an individual versus nudging a complex adaptive system, which is what a team is.
Right. So you can't just apply linear, individual behavioral equations to a nonlinear group dynamic.
Exactly. A team solving complex problems is a fluid, dynamic organism. Forcing a rigid, micromanaged workflow, identifying gaps, resolving conflicts, checking boxes, onto a temporary team disrupts the natural, adaptive communication required for complex problem solving. It forces the team to manage the tool rather than managing the task. They get caught up in the mechanics of updating the system instead of actually collaborating.
I can see that. It's like in the corporate world when teams spend more time updating their Jira tickets and checking boxes than actually building good software or solving creative problems. It's agile fatigue in action. The tool becomes the master, not the servant.
It's a perfect parallel. You're losing the adaptive capacity, the fluid communication that true collective intelligence relies on, because you're forcing a rigid, individualistic framework onto a dynamic group.
So this research isn't just an ivory tower experiment. It has serious direct implications for the modern corporate world, especially with the rise of bossware.
Absolutely. Since the pandemic normalized remote work, there's been this pervasive fear among employers about a drop in productivity. And that fear has fueled a massive surge in bossware or tattleware, software installed on company devices to monitor employees. These are the tools that track keystrokes, mouse movements, web browsing, even take random screenshots or use facial recognition, right? It's pretty invasive. Extremely. Surveys from late 2022 indicated that 60% of companies with remote workers were using employee monitoring software. And just like the real-time effort dashboard backfired in the MTurk study, bossware is backfiring spectacularly in the corporate world. The Wells Fargo incident comes to mind here, doesn't it? Perfect example. Just this past June, Wells Fargo fired more than a dozen employees for using mouse jigglers, those little devices or software that simulate cursor movement to prevent computers from going to sleep, creating the illusion of active work. This highlights a toxic arms race. Employers implement draconian tracking, and employees find ways to fake the metrics. So instead of actually working, they're spending time and energy figuring out how to look like they're working without actually doing the work. It's a lose-lose. And research backs this up. Studies highlighted by Forbes show that surveilling workers actually increases rule breaking. Monitored employees are substantially more likely to take unapproved breaks, disregard instructions, damage workplace property, steal office equipment, and purposely work at a slow pace. Why? Because surveillance strips away personal autonomy and psychological ownership. If the machine is responsible for tracking my output, then my internal responsibility for my behavior diminishes. It's a direct assault on psychological safety.
So if internal relative tracking, pitting team members against each other, is such a trust destroyer and triggers the sucker effect, what should managers do if they still want to track effort or motivate teams?
Behavioral science offers a crucial alternative here. If you absolutely must use effort tracking or gamification, compare the team to an external benchmark. Instead of showing Alice that she's doing more work than Bob, which makes Alice quit, show Alice and Bob that their team is slightly behind the average effort of other teams in the company.
So you unite the team against an external enemy or benchmark. It fosters cohesion rather than internal division. That makes so much sense.
Exactly. It shifts the focus from internal competition to external challenge, preserving psychological safety and encouraging collective effort. So ultimately, bossware is a management failure disguised as a technological solution. If you're tracking keystrokes, you're measuring presence, not impact.
And that really ties back to Anita Williams-Woolley's foundational work. True collective intelligence, the ability of a group to solve complex problems, requires psychological safety and trust. Surveillance, by its very nature, destroys that psychological safety, thereby putting a hard ceiling on how intelligent and effective your team can actually be.
It's a critical insight for anyone designing work environments today.
So, to sum up, it really seems like individual nudges don't scale to groups. Productivity hacks that work for individuals, like rigid progress checklists, can actually disrupt the adaptive communication required for a team to function effectively.
Absolutely. And second, that relative effort tracking, showing team members exactly how much they're contributing compared to their peers, triggers that sucker effect, demotivating top performers and causing low performers to withdraw. It's a race to the bottom.
But there's good news. We found a powerful collaboration hack, skill mapping. The only reliable way to boost collective intelligence in temporary teams is a simple nudge forcing members to discuss their unique skills before starting a task. That's a relatively easy thing to implement.
It is. And finally, the big takeaway. Transparency isn't always a virtue. Well-intentioned digital transparency tools and bossware have these profound unintended psychological effects. More data visibility can sometimes do far more harm than good to collaboration and trust.
That leaves me with some really interesting questions for the future of work. With generative AI becoming embedded in everything from Slack to Microsoft Teams, are these AI agents going to act as the skill facilitator bots that actually worked? Or are they going to become automated middle managers assigning to-do lists, which we now know completely failed?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The design choices made now for AI integration will have massive implications for team dynamics.
And what about the future of remote work itself? If remote work inherently lacks those physical cues of effort, you can't see someone sweating at their desk. How can managers truly evaluate performance without relying on these toxic digital proxies like keystroke tracking? We need better metrics.
It points to a need for a fundamental rethink of what productivity even means, moving away from presence and inputs and towards impact.
And finally, this study used temporary MTurk groups. As corporate teams become more project-based and fluid, this Hollywood model of work, where teams assemble for a specific project and then disband, how do we build those crucial transactive memory systems quickly before the project even ends? How do we accelerate that skill mapping without it feeling forced?
The challenge is building trust and shared understanding rapidly in a transient environment. It's a core tension in the future of work.
That's all for this episode of Incentives Matter. Join us next time as we keep unpacking what really drives decisions. Thanks for listening.
Choose wisely, or at least know why you didn't.